Every so often, the piston cylinder may require cleaning. It's not a common need to clean the piston, and that's a benefit of the lubrication flow that continuously flows from the middle of the piston cylinder gap out towards the end. That does a very nice job of keeping contaminants from reaching the critical surface of the piston in the cylinder. But on the occasion that cleaning is required, there is a technique that we'll introduce and demonstrate in this video that works very well. For those of you who have prior piston cleaning experience, if you have a method that works, then by all means stick with that method. The method that we are showing is for those who are looking for techniques or tips on how to do the job and to do the job quickly. The cleaning technique that we're going to show involves the use of Windex glass cleaner and paper towels. It's based loosely on the concept of bigger is better. In the concept of the paper towels, we just use plain generic non-lotion, non-scented paper towels that you can get at Walmart, Target, any big box store. And it's a concept that they have a lot of lint, and when we use them, they leave large lint particles behind that are easy to see and easy to blow off. For the solvent, we're not pitching the product, but we use Windex because it's readily available, it's low cost, and it also leaves a lot of residue behind. It leaves a lot of residue that's also easy to wipe off with a dry towel. So it's this concept of large. If we can see it, if it's large, it's all that easier to remove. So to start the cleaning process, we have to separate the piston from the cylinder. We have a tool that can assist with this. This is the alignment tool where we can cradle the cylinder and piston assembly and slide it over the top and separate it. Or another method is just simply to do a fluid movement of the cylinder from off of the piston. When we do this method, the objective is to think of follow-through. We're going to take the cylinder, slide it up, and not end right here, but end up here. And this has the benefit of putting follow-through in so that we have one fluid motion of separating the cylinder from the piston, and that minimizes the chance of it getting stuck as it exits the gap. When cleaning the piston cylinder, a concept that has worked well is to think of the process as anything that I touch can potentially transfer contaminants. So if my hands are dirty or greasy, and I touch a clean towel, and that clean towel then touches the critical surface of the piston cylinder, that sets up a chain where contaminants can be transferred. So I like to present the idea that anything that will be touching the piston and the cylinder ought to be clean. And to start with, we're going to start by wiping down the outside of the cylinder and the inside of the piston. This is commonly the area where bare hands, or if you have gloves, and gloves can transfer contaminants, touch. And so it's not uncommon to have fingerprints on the outside as well as from the inside of the piston due to our pinch and grab method. It's also not uncommon that there might be slight aluminum dust on the outside of the cylinder as we put it in the mounting post. There is a little bit of contact as we slide it up and pull it out. So we're going to start by cleaning the non-critical surfaces. Critical surface is simply defined as the highly polished surface of the outside of the piston and the inside of the cylinder. So I take the Windex and just put some light squirts on it. It's not saturated, it's just dampened. And I'll just grab the cylinder and wipe down the whole outside. I'm not concerned about careful cleanup. I'm just knocking off fingerprints, grease, any other contaminants that could be on the outside. And I'm going to carefully insert this into the piston and do the same thing. Now there's one technique for handling the piston at this point. If your fingers are small enough, it works to take your two fingers inside the piston and just kind of spread them a little bit. That way you can handle the piston safely without having to touch the critical outside surface. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to start handling the pistons in the cylinder to clean them. And I want to make sure that my fingers don't unknowingly transfer any contaminants from the fingers to the towel to the piston. So I'm going to take the same towel. It's already a little damp, make it a little damper. And the glass cleaner is pretty mild, that it doesn't seem to dry out my skin or cause any harm to it. But at least now my fingers, the oil that's on my fingers, is not going to be transferred to the piston cylinder. So discard the towel and start with a new one. I'm going to fold this one into quarters, moisten it, and start with the piston. All I'm doing is wiping down the outside. I'm not scrubbing hard. I'm not buffing it. This is just to knock off any smudges, any oils, any liquids that might be on the piston. Typically, if there are contaminants, they're going to be very small and minimal, but it doesn't take much to take a clean piston and make it non-useful because of a small piece of contaminant. Set this aside and grab the cylinder. And here I'm cleaning out the inside. Just going around, kind of in and out. Do both ends. And just for grins, wipe down the outside one more time. So now we have the Windex and the solvent on the piston and the cylinder. We let that dry. Typically it'll dry within a minute or two. And we buff it off. Take a clean towel, and I'm going to fold it into quarters. Probably even to eighths at this point. And what I'm doing is I'm just simply wiping off the dried residual Windex solvent from off of the surface. I'm not buffing hard. And the more you do this, some people say that they can develop a feel that when they first start to buff, there's a little reluctance to movement. And as the residue comes off, that it actually tends to free up a little bit and just slide. The trick is to rotate the piston to get all the surfaces here. I'm also being very careful that my other fingers don't come in contact with the critical surface. And I'm trying to use only one side of the paper towel. So we'll try that. We'll set that aside, see what that looks like. Grab the cylinder, using the same surface. Buff the inside of the cylinder. And again, I'm not pushing hard, I'm not rubbing hard, I'm not trying to polish anything. I'm just wiping off the residual Windex. Now, a note for orientation. If we can zoom in on the cylinder, we'll see that there is a serial number engraved on the outside. Some have an arrow etched on it, some don't. But the serial number denotes the orientation. Serial number goes on top. And on the inside of the piston, we also have a serial number etched there to denote the top of that. So now I have both the piston and the cylinder facing upright. After we've buffed, we still have the issue of lint, and we talked about big lint being easy to remove. Well, with big lint, that also means we're going to have big lint on the piston and on the cylinder, so we need to blow that off before reassembly. Out of convenience, you can take one of the tubes from your air-operated valves, insert it into the valve drive portion, and off screen, I'm going to go to FPG tools, and if you're in the diagnostic mode, I'm going to click on the corresponding valve button that the tube is connected to. In this case, it's valve 10. Valve 10 is normally used to operate the bypass assembly. So I click that, and now we have a flow of gas coming out of this tube, and I can use that to blow off the lint. We'll start on the outside, work around the top surface. and then blow off the inside. I do like to pay particular attention to where the piston retaining nuts go in, as that tends to be a collection point for lint. And we'll try that. And to turn off the gas, simply go back to FPG Tools and click on that valve to deactivate. To reassemble, it's strongly recommended that you have a piston cylinder reassembly and alignment tool. To use this tool, you simply insert the cylinder into the cup and place the piston on top of the spindle. As I'm looking, I do see some lint, and I'm going to blow that lint off. I'm not sure that that lint would get into the piston cylinder gap, but I know it's there, and it has a probability of getting in there, and I just want to make this whole process as easy as possible. So I'll grab my tube, turn on the gas again, and blow off our tool. Okay, to use the tool, start with the cylinder, make sure that the orientation is correct. And it's a tight fit, so make sure that you're pretty close to having the piston straight up and down before you put it into this holder. And slide that over the top of the spindle. Grab your piston, make sure it's right side up as well. And now the alignment plays a role. This is where we talk about having the engraved serial number match the engraved serial number on the piston. In this case, I have my piston 180 degrees out of phase, so I'm just going to rotate that. And what you can't see on the camera now is that the serial number for the cylinder is here, but the serial number for the piston is facing opposite of where the cylinder will be. At this point, I simply slide up and take the whole assembly off. To remove, pinch and grab, remove the holder. Of the entire cleaning process, this next step is perhaps the most critical to getting a clean and stable piston. We cleaned it with the solvent, we buffed it off with a dry towel. We reassembled. We also took our gas and blew off most of the lint. But the reality is, there's usually a piece or two of lint that remains on the surface. And all it takes is one piece of contaminant within the gap of the piston cylinder to cause the FPG to be unstable. So this next technique employs, for lack of a better term, a bounce. And the bounce has a real nice phenomena where when we can bounce the cylinder, it tends to draw air into the tapered gap and push it out. So when there's lint, you might feel this thing hesitate a little bit, and as we bounce it, at one point it'll become very obvious that it has become freed. What I like to do is I like to put this on my padded hand and bounce while rotating. You'll notice that the movement's very limited. I'm only moving it about a ½ inch or maybe 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters. If I move it much more beyond that, we start getting into an alignment issue where if I go up this high, I'm no longer parallel with the piston due to our tapered cylinder gap, and I will feel some hesitation due to misalignment. So if I keep it down here, I can get a real good feel for how this piston cylinder is responding. So I bounce it in one orientation, I flip it over, and bounce it in the other orientation. Sometimes this is an iterative process. You have to flip it over and bounce a number of times before it'll free up on you. But right now, this is feeling pretty good. I'm working any lint particles out from the gap. So now I'm doing final assessment. And I'm moving it just a little bit, even less than when I was bouncing it right now. And what I'm feeling for is the slightest hesitation. We're operating on the principle of an air bearing. The gap between the piston and the cylinder is lubricated by air. And so this should feel perfectly free. Any hesitation suggests that there's probably a little piece of lint or other contaminant still on the surface. And right now, folks, this feels very, very good. So I'll get my orientation lined up. And the last step is to reinstall it into the mounting post following the 4-step process. The final proof if you have a clean and stable FPG will be to perform the 60-second drift test.